Derek stared at his investment app at 6 in the morning, refreshing it like it might change. The balance read $1,400,000, and he had been chasing that exact figure since he was 31. For Derek, $1 million was never just a number, it was the finish line he had built his entire adult life around. He still had the spreadsheet from 2019 that said, "Hit 1 million, retire, done." He called his wife, they opened a bottle of wine they had been saving, and for one night, Derek felt like he had won the game. 3 weeks later, he sat down to actually plan his retirement budget, and the number on the calculator did not match the feeling from that night. At a 4% withdrawal rate, his $1 million produced about $3,333 a month before taxes. That is less than what Derek currently spends on his mortgage, groceries, and his daughter's college tuition combined. He had spent almost 3 decades chasing a number that, on paper, suddenly felt smaller than the life he was already living. Derek is not unusual. He is the textbook example of what happens when an entire culture agrees on one magic number without ever checking the math. So is $1 million actually enough to retire in 2026? Or is it a story we keep telling ourselves because it sounds round and impressive? This video is going to take the $1 million myth apart piece by piece, then build you the real formula that determines what you personally need. Nobody actually calculated $1 million for you specifically. It became popular because it is a clean, round, satisfying number to say out loud. Northwestern Mutual runs one of the largest retirement surveys in the country every year, and in 2026, they asked thousands of Americans what they believe they need to retire comfortably. The answer was $1.46 million, up from $1.26 million the year before, a jump of more than 15% in 12 months. Other major studies do not even agree with each other. Empower's users peg their target closer to 1.1 million. Schroders lands near 1.3 million. High net worth Americans surveyed by Northwestern Mutual said their personal number is closer to $2.67 million. If the experts in the surveys cannot agree within a $1.5 million range, that should already tell you something about treating any single number as gospel. Clever Real Estate's 2026 Retirement Statistics Report found that retirees themselves expect to need an average of $823,800, well under $1 million. Bankrate found that about a third of workers think they will need more than $1 million, while Betterment found that nearly half believe they need at least that much. Read that again. These are beliefs people hold about a future number, not financial plans built from their actual spending. Almost half of Americans surveyed in 2026 say they do not expect to be financially prepared for retirement at all. Roughly half also believe it is somewhat or very likely they will outlive their own savings. That kind of fear does not usually come from a careful calculation. It comes from comparing yourself to a headline you saw once and never verified. Every few months, a new article repeats some version of the magic number, and the number keeps climbing because inflation and headlines feed off each other. Even the executive behind Northwestern Mutual's own study has said the number is meant as a general guidepost, not a specific savings target for any one person. The company that created one of the most quoted $1 million headlines in the country is quietly telling people not to take it too literally. The number sticks because round, big, dramatic figures travel further on the internet than a boring sentence like "it depends on your spending." Before we tear this number apart, it deserves a fair hearing, because there are real reasons $1 million feels like the right target. For most of modern history, a millionaire was an extremely rare and wealthy person. The word itself was built to signal financial arrival. Humans are wired to plan around round numbers. $1 million is easy to remember, easy to repeat, and easy to picture. Having one clear number to aim for removes the discomfort of an open-ended question like how much is enough. The median retirement account balance for Americans in their 50s sits around $460,000, and in their 60s, it is closer to $568,000. Hitting 7 figures in retirement savings really is a meaningful accomplishment for the average household. Most people never get there at all. The median balance for people aged 55 to 64 is closer to $185,000. And for ages 65 to 74, it sits around 200,000. That gap between what people believe they need and what most people actually have is exactly why the $1 million number triggers so much anxiety. Even the word average is misleading here, because a small number of very high earners pull the average balance up, while the typical person sits for below it. The median 401k balance across every single age group sits under $100,000 total. If your real balance is nowhere near $1 million and the headline says you need $1.46 million, panic is a completely rational first reaction. The problem is not that people feel anxious. The problem is that the number causing the anxiety was never built for them in the first place. Derek's spreadsheet, the one from 2019, was using a goalpost borrowed from a survey average, not from his actual cost of living. So let's actually check the math behind $1 million and see what it produces, because the real numbers tell a very different story than the headline. The most common framework for retirement withdrawals is called the 4% rule, built from research by financial advisor Bill Bengen back in the 1990s. Bengen studied historical market data and found that withdrawing 4% of your portfolio in year one, then adjusting for inflation every year after, historically lasted 30 years in the vast majority of scenarios. Apply that to Derek's $1 million, and you get $40,000 a year, or about $3,333 a month, before taxes. Most retirees do not live off portfolio withdrawals alone. They also collect Social Security, where the average monthly benefit for a retired worker sits just over $2,000. Stack that on top of the 4% withdrawal, and a retiree with exactly $1 million could be looking at somewhere around $61,000 to $66,000 a year, depending on when they claim. On the surface, that looks like a perfectly livable income for most American households. The 4% rule is not actually settled science. It is a moving target that researchers revisit every single year. Morningstar's 2026 State of Retirement Income Report puts the new baseline safe withdrawal rate at 3.9% for retirees using a steady, fixed spending plan. That shift reflects current bond yields, stock valuations, and updated assumptions about how long retirement actually needs to last. On a $1 million portfolio, the gap between 4% and 3.9% is only about $1,000 a year, which sounds small. Other respected voices in the field, including past Morningstar research, have pushed the safe rate down toward 3.3% for more conservative planning. To generate the same income at 3.3% instead of 4%, your portfolio needs to be roughly a third larger. That means the real version of Derek's $1 million comfort number could actually sit closer to $1.3 million under a more conservative plan. Bengen's original research assumed a 30-year retirement, but life expectancy has climbed, and some planners now model 35 to 40 years instead. The longer your money needs to last, the smaller the percentage you can safely pull out each year without running dry. Inflation is not a one-time event. It is a slow erosion that compounds every single year you are alive. By some estimates, today's $1 million buys roughly what? $600,000 bought back in 2010, just from inflation alone. That means the $1 million target itself has been quietly moving the entire time. People have been chasing it. The finish line keeps sliding forward. Fidelity estimates that a typical 65-year-old couple will spend around $330,000 on healthcare costs throughout retirement, and that figure does not even include long-term care. Drawn straight from a $1 million portfolio, healthcare alone can quietly eat up roughly a third of the entire nest egg. Add the possibility of a nursing home or assisted living stay, and that healthcare bucket can grow dramatically larger for a meaningful share of retirees. Here is the part almost nobody factors into their $1 million math. Social Security itself is on a shrinking runway. The Congressional Budget Office now projects the Social Security Trust Fund that pays retirement benefits will run dry by 2032, a year earlier than previous estimates. If Congress does nothing before then, the law currently requires an automatic across-the-board benefit cut of roughly 23%. This is not a fringe prediction. It comes straight from the CBO's own February 2026 budget outlook and from the Social Security Trustee's annual reports. Around 70 million Americans currently collect Social Security benefits, and under current law, that cut would apply to every single one of them automatically. The average retirement benefit was just over $2,000 a month as of early 2026, and a 23% cut would shave off roughly $450 to $500 of that every month. If you are planning your entire retirement income around a Social Security benefit, that might shrink. Your real safety margin is smaller than the surveys assume. Lower safe withdrawal rates, decades of inflation, rising healthcare costs, and a shrinking Social Security floor all push in the same direction at once. $1 million in 2026 is not nothing, but it is no longer the comfortable, worry-free finish line the culture has been advertising for years. Before this turns into pure doom and gloom, the honest thing to do is steelman the case for why $1 million, or even less, might genuinely be enough. Remember that $1.46 million figure. It is a self-reported belief about an ideal lifestyle, not a calculated minimum survival number. You do not need an ideal, lavish retirement to be financially secure. You need a sustainable one. And those are very different targets. Maria retired last year with $640,000 in savings, no mortgage, and a paid-off home in a mid-sized city with a low cost of living. Between Social Security and a modest withdrawal rate, her actual monthly income covers her actual monthly expenses with room to spare. A single scary headline number is mostly useless because where you live can change your real retirement cost by tens of thousands of dollars a year. Retiring in a high-cost city like San Francisco or New York requires a dramatically larger nest egg than retiring in a lower-cost state with similar amenities. Someone who has paid off their home needs a fraction of the income required by someone still carrying a 30-year mortgage into their 60s. Even with the trust fund concerns, Social Security still functions as a guaranteed income floor for the vast majority of retirees. It does not disappear entirely. Even the worst-case automatic cut scenario still leaves the program paying out a majority of scheduled benefits, not zero. Most households spend less in retirement than during their peak earning years, because commuting costs, retirement contributions, and work-related expenses simply disappear. Northwestern Mutual's own 2026 study found that half of millennials and Gen X now expect to work in some capacity during retirement, even if only part-time. Earning even a modest part-time income in your 60s and early 70s can dramatically reduce how much your portfolio needs to cover on its own. Once children are grown and out of the house, household expenses typically shrink in a way that headline retirement targets rarely account for. Most actual retirees in America are living on far less than $1 million right now, and the country has not collapsed into widespread financial ruin. The truth is not that $1 million is a lie in every single case. The truth is that it was never personal to begin with. Derek's anxiety is valid because his real expenses outpace what $1 million safely produces, and Maria's confidence is valid because her real expenses do not. The exact same $1 million balance can mean financial freedom for one person and financial fragility for another, depending entirely on their actual life. So if $1 million is not a universal answer, what is the actual formula that replaces it? The real starting point is not a survey average, it is your own honest, itemized monthly spending in retirement. There is a simple formula financial planners actually use, called the Rule of 25, and it is just the 4% rule flipped upside down. Take your expected annual expenses in retirement, subtract any guaranteed income like Social Security or a pension, then multiply what is left by 25. Multiplying by 25 is mathematically the same as planning to withdraw 4% a year. It just frames the question around your life instead of an abstract percentage. Derek's actual essential expenses run about $70,000 a year, and his expected Social Security benefit covers roughly $24,000 of that. That leaves a $46,000 annual gap that his portfolio actually needs to cover, not the full $70,000. $46,000 multiplied by 25 comes out to $1.15 million. That is Derek's real number, not the round million he had been chasing. If Derek wants to use a more conservative 3.9% withdrawal rate instead of 4, his real target climbs closer to 1.18 million. Take someone with simpler expenses, say $45,000 a year in essential costs, with Social Security covering $22,000 of that. That leaves only a $23,000 annual gap for the portfolio to fill. Multiply $23,000 by 25, and the real target lands at $575,000, less than half of the cultural $1 million benchmark. Now, picture someone planning a higher cost lifestyle, $110,000 a year in expenses, with Social Security covering $28,000. That leaves an $82,000 annual gap. The portfolio alone has to support. Multiply that by 25, and the real target is $2.05 million, more than double the famous round number everyone keeps quoting. 575,000, 1.15 million, and 2.05 million all came from completely realistic, ordinary households. The lie was never that retirement requires a lot of money. The lie was pretending one number could describe every single household at once. It is comforting because it removes the work of calculating your own situation, but comfort and accuracy are not the same thing. If your real expenses are modest and your home is paid off, you may discover your actual number is smaller and far more reachable than the headlines suggest. If your lifestyle costs more or you live in an expensive area, your real number may genuinely be higher than $1 million, and pretending otherwise just delays the planning. Both relief and anxiety are appropriate responses here, because they are based on your actual math instead of someone else's survey answer. The goal of this video was never to make you feel good. It was to replace a borrowed number with one that actually belongs to you. Start by tracking your actual monthly spending for at least 60 to 90 days. Not your guess, your real bank and card statements. Split that spending into essential costs like housing, food, and healthcare versus optional costs like travel and entertainment. Log into your Social Security account directly and pull your actual projected benefit. Do not rely on a stranger's average. Given the current trust fund timeline, it is wise to model your plan using a benefit that is 15 to 20% lower than your official estimate, just in case. Subtract your adjusted guaranteed income from your essential annual expenses. That remaining number is the gap your savings actually need to cover. Take that gap and multiply it by 25 for a standard plan, or by closer to 28 if you want a more conservative cushion. Layer on a separate healthcare and long-term care buffer on top of your core number. Do not let it hide inside your everyday spending. Your real number is not fixed forever. It should shift as your spending, your health, and the broader economy shift too. Learning to calculate your own number is a far more valuable financial skill than memorizing whatever figure made headlines this year. Derek eventually redid his math, realized his real number was closer to 1.15 million, and instead of panicking, he simply adjusted his retirement date by 18 months. That single calculation gave him more control over his future than any survey or headline ever could. Pull up your own spending. Do the subtraction, run the multiplication, and find the number that is actually yours instead of the one you inherited from a survey. If this kind of real numbers first breakdown is useful to you, stick around, because that is exactly what this channel is built around, turning financial noise into actual math you can use.